As deserts across the world expand, around 1.2 billion people are at risk from desertification. And according to the United Nations, Africa is the worst affected. It's estimated that deserts in parts of the continent are expanding at a rate of 5 kilometers per year. And with 65% of arable land already damaged, Africa is facing a crisis that will affect both its food supply and its population. And so, as global leaders gather in Marrakesh at COP22 to discuss ways to combat changing global weather, what decisions will be taken to combat land degradation on the continent? And what can be done to mitigate the effects of Africa's growing deserts? I'm Lindy Mtongana. Welcome to Talk Africa. Deserts expand naturally, but desertification is a process where land in arid and semi-dry areas becomes degraded. Soil loses its productivity and vegetation thins because of human activities and, more recently, climate change. In Africa, already 2/3 of all land is either desert or dry land, and so desertification presents a major problem.
This used to be a family home. Children played in the garden, farm animals slept in the yard. But now it's buried in the sand. Chakmoum in southern Tunisia was once a vibrant village, but over the years, sandy winds from the Sahara Desert have made life difficult here. More than half the population has left.
You see, all these people left their houses because of the sand. They migrated and went to towns nearby because of natural factors.
In simple terms, desertification is when once fertile land is rendered barren. Climate change is one cause, but human factors are also to blame, such as overuse of water resources and poor farming practices. But the local authorities are trying to help. They've built these artificial sand dunes to stop the winds and avoid more land erosion. And close by, they're planting trees to bring life back to the land.
Desertification is the loss of fertility of the land. And if our land is in degradation, it loses its vegetation cover, and the quality of the land becomes poor and incapable of producing. What happens then is the inhabitants will leave and migrate.
The water used to irrigate these trees is salty. Local farmers are struggling to keep the soil fertile and the palms alive.
This house was covered with sand. When they made the artificial dunes, the sand diminished. But because of the natural factors, the sand is still eating us up. Our lives are hell.
There is a link between desertification and migration of people from this region. As the Sahara Desert spreads north and south on the African continent, the people are losing hope that they can survive in this beautiful but lifeless landscape. Matthew Edwards, CCTV.
And now to offer further analysis into Africa's expanding deserts, I have some expert guests standing by. In Lagos, Ola Orosanya joins us. He is the CEO of Globetech Remedial. And with me in our Nairobi studios from the World Agroforestry Center, I'm joined by Dr. Emrias Betemariam. Thank you both for participating in this discussion. Dr. Betemariam, let's start with you. We know, of course, that Africa is struggling a lot with this challenge of land degradation and desertification. Perhaps just for the sake of context, just tell us the scale of the problem that we're facing.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. And then I think land degradation is one of the very critical environmental problems that we have been really facing at a global scale. And then when you come to Africa, almost a third to half of the land is one way or the other is affected by land degradation, and then of course desertification to some extent, which seriously really affecting the sustainable development agenda that we have here in Africa. And then also it's really affecting the income and then a number of things here in Africa. So it is really one of the very serious environmental problem, I would say, here in Africa.
A serious problem indeed when you say that a third of our land is really at risk. Mr. Oresanya, let's bring you in here. From the Nigerian perspective, and we know that forests in Nigeria are a matter of huge concern, just explain to us the situation in Nigeria and the broader region.
Well, thank you. If you look at Nigeria, Nigeria is, the landmass in Nigeria is over 900,000 square kilometers, and over 350,000 of square kilometers has been threatened by desertification in Nigeria. So forest preservation is a major issue in Nigeria, and the northern part of Nigeria, which is mainly the semi-arid area, which is the Sahel region, and the Sudan, Guinea area, and the northern part of Nigeria is actually adversely affected right now. So it's a major issue, and it's due to mainly the unguided deforestation and a lot of anthropogenic activities due to man and poverty, leading to overexploitation of all this forest in Nigeria in particular.
Well, we'll come back to the issues of really what is behind all this degradation, but just for a moment, let's just look at the communities that are most affected. It seems to be some of the most vulnerable populations in Africa that are facing the brunt of this crisis.
So I think smallholder farmers are really so much affected by this one because they don't have, enough resilience or enough capacity to cope with this kind of, problem. And then, yeah, oftentimes they have also very small, natural capital and then, human capital and then also financial capital to be able to really cope up with land degradation and the consequences. So anytime it comes, I think the smallholder farmers are the ones who's going to be really affected much.
There is a concern, let's bring you back in here, Mr. Oresanya, that these communities are going to find life forever more difficult in the years to come because of the causes of land degradation. First, that some of these causes, as you've mentioned, are man-made, but climate concerns are not getting any easier. Am I correct?
Oh, yes, majority of the problem are actually man-made right now, especially in Nigeria. And as far back as 1930, before the consciousness of the article on climate change, there has been concerns raised by the Anglo-French government then on the southward approach of the Sahara Desert towards Nigeria, and there have been concerted effort then on the afforestation of all the northern part of Nigeria. But it's due to lack of articulation of implementation of various policies, both the global conventions and the national policies. There's been a kind of non-approach to, a serious approach to implement the dictates of those line of actions in those articles. So majority of those things, beyond just the climate change issue, it's also man-made.
And Dr. Betu-Mariam, if we do not address this urgently, what is at stake?
Well, I mean, if you don't address this one, I mean, it will be really, it is a very major problem, again, not only environmental problem, but it will also affect the social and the economic dimensions of, our well-being. So we are losing our landscapes, and then also that definitely will affect also the livelihood of many smallholders that you mentioned, because I mean, we have a lot of smallholding farmers in Africa than else, I would say. So all these people might be really facing problem on their daily life. And then also reversing that land degradation would be really costly, and then sometimes it might be very difficult to do it. So unless we address it very quickly and then try to really control further degradation of the existing land, I think it is going to be a very serious problem to address a number of our sustainable development agendas in our plate. Yeah, thanks.
Well, now that we've explored what is at stake, it's time now for a quick break. But when we come back, we'll look at some of the solutions to the challenge around land degradation in Africa. Stay with us. Welcome back to Talk Africa. We go to Burkina Faso now, where a farmer from the village of Gourga in Yatenga province has worked for more than 30 years to reverse the remorseless advance of the Sahara Desert. By using traditional farming techniques, he a 50-acre forest in the area. And now the man has embarked on a series of training programs and projects to ensure his work outlives him.
Yakuba Sawadogo is an expert on turning desert to forest, and since 2013 he's been training dozens of people, ranging from farmers to research institutions on his methods. In order to guarantee the continuity of his work, Sawadogo makes the transfer of knowledge to the youth his key priority.
After 40 years of work, I found that it was necessary to train the young people for the preservation of the environment. For today, we have no strength to continue the work. We place much hope on those we are currently training to ensure the future.
Yakuba Sawadogo is also a traditional healer. Almost 80 medicinal plants covered in his forest, and Yakuba says he uses these plants to treat the sick. He's built a small traditional medical health center near his forest, where patients will receive treatment very soon.
In these forests, each tree has a specific purpose, which many people do not know. My desire is that this hospital will be a training center for the future generation, because I want to transfer my medical knowledge to them.
Testimonies from Sawadogo's students are encouraging and show that restoring soils damaged by desertification and drought is possible and can be successful.
Mr. Yakuba has one planting technique called Zai, which is to dig semi-pits in the soil during the pre-season to catch water and collect compost. Seeds are then placed in the pits, and then in the third year, we let the plants grow and the forest begins to take shape.
When we started growing this forest 30 years ago, there was only one tree on this land, and here is the tree.
Yakuba was honored with many awards for his significant contribution to sustainable land management. He hopes his legacy continues. Maria Galang, CCTV.
And our discussion continues here in the Nairobi studio. Still joining me from Lagos is Ole Oresanya, the CEO of Globetech Remedial. And joining the discussion from Beijing is Dr. Shen Yiyang, the Senior Energy Consultant of Asia Development Bank. And still with me in Nairobi from the World Agroforestry Center, Dr. Emrias Betemariam. Let's start with our guest in Beijing, Dr. Shen. We've just been talking, of course, about desertification. We understand that this is an issue that also affects China.
Well, China also have a similar problem, just like in Western China. So the way we deal with that is we apply the kind of modern agricultural technology to keep the production, and also we can select those vegetable or rice which demand less water than the general species.
Right, Mr. Oresanya, let's bring this particular question to you now. We've just heard from Dr. Shen in Beijing that the use of modern agricultural technology is helping to combat desertification in China. Is this a possibility for Africa? Do we have the expertise, the skills to manage the kind of technology that's required to combat desertification?
Well, I think that the first thing you look at in technology, modern technology, is all about meteorological equipment to predict and also to project for ecological disasters. You start from mitigation programs, and if you deploy technology to really abate the possibilities of having a natural disaster when it comes to ecological issues. So it starts from there. Then also our technology can be deployed in the areas of soil preservation in agronomy, really, soil preservation and protection. And then the renewable energy alternative that prevents people from exploiting the forest, so that I can assist in forest conservation. When you have new energy and renewable energy program alternatives, it assists a lot in taking away the poor, those people that depend really on the forest economy. You can distract them by having alternatives for energy sources, and making sure that we have improved yield in soil that are already been threatened. so that you can have improved yield. For example, in Nigeria, you have the Middle Belt in Nigeria within the Sudan Savannah region, where you have mainly grain. That's the area where you have most of the grain in Nigeria being produced. You already have this area being encroached upon by the desert. So the technology that can be deployed in those areas come from irrigation, construction of dams, and improve the irrigation and improve the soil conditions in those areas. So technology can actually do a lot, but it takes the commitment and the discipline of administrators of most of these areas to really deploy the appropriate technology. The technologies are available and they can be indigenized.
And beyond technology, there's also the solutions that are rather community-based. And Dr. Betta Mariam, let's bring this to you now. The Great Green Wall is one such initiative that is being touted as a possible solution to desertification. Planting trees across the width of Africa from Dakar all the way to Djibouti, and relying on those vulnerable communities themselves to be the ones at the forefront of the fight against the desert. What is your thought on these kinds of solutions?
Yeah, I think you brought a very good idea, because when you say even technology, and then it's a different form of technology, like it could be information. So a well-informed community or society can really protect the environment better than less informed ones, for instance. In terms of, the initiative you mentioned, not only the Great Green Wall, also there is also very recent last COP, and then there is also what called the Afri 100 million. So African governments are committed to restore 100 million hectares of land, just besides on top of the Great Green Wall. So I mean, there are technologies like the agroforestry practices were very key in terms of planting trees on degraded landscapes, and then to prevent further degradation, and then also to restore already degraded lands. I think there are a lot of technologies that smallholders can easily do it and then practice that one at a community level, and then be able to really get multiple benefits, not only to protect land degradation, but they can also get their nutrition, their fruits, and then a number of other benefits, because sometimes doing one thing just for the sake of one output might not be economical for smallholder farmers. But I mean, practicing this sustainable kind of land management practices could also even have a lot of co-benefits that we often undermine. So I think there are technologies which are at a local level, and then also there are technologies which really comes out from research, which really brings up agricultural productivity and then improve the quality of the soil. That means you are building its capacity to resist further degradation and then restore. So I think there are a lot of technologies that we can tap into.
And Dr. Shen, let's bring you back in the discussion here now. There is also, of course, room for various stakeholders to work together in addressing some of the major concerns around. What is the most effective role you think that international funders can play in Africa when it comes to this particular challenge?
I think besides funding issue, there are quite some issues need to be addressed. Taking the example of Israel, in the desert they can produce a lot of vegetable, rice, or even fish. So in China, I think the experience is investment plus technology and plus proper business model, and also people need to be work together. Proper training also necessary. I think if we can have more funds, we need to have an integrated approach to all of them.
Thanks, Dr. Shen. We will come back to that a moment from now, especially on the issue of funding. But right now, in COP22's host country of Morocco, the country's oases are in danger of disappearing. Climate change, droughts, and the mismanagement of surface water has contributed to the dry stream beds. One man is trying to rehabilitate a 7-hectare plot so that palm trees can once again grow in the barren land and help create jobs in the region. Let's take a look.
In the Sahara, the town of Rissani is surrounded by the hilly oasis of Tifalalet. But because of global warming, the desert is slowly eating away at this town in southeastern Morocco. Hundreds of palm trees have lost life due to lack of water.
This region has known several periods of drought. The worst one occurred at the end of the 1980s, and many of the region's inhabitants migrated elsewhere, depriving it of its workforce. So the agricultural sector stopped being productive.
For centuries, oases have shielded Morocco's interior from desertification. Hassan Sadok is trying to rehabilitate a 7-hectare plot of land. Palm trees are the backbone of the region's economy, providing revenue and jobs.
I heard about an important project to grow dates and decided to take up the challenge and invest in dates, especially the Marjhul variety, which is very profitable.
In 2008, the government launched the Green Morocco project to restore palm groves and rebuild the agricultural sector. The aim is to grow 8 million palm trees in 2020. In the last century, the number of palm trees fell from 15 million to 4.8 million.
We are talking about a decline in oases if we don't act. On this initiative and programs such as Green Morocco, which aims to rehabilitate palm groves and water resources, the Moroccan state has mobilized funds. It has also created an agency dedicated to this ecosystem.
Oases will be discussed at the COP22 climate conference in Marrakesh. Morocco will present plans to safeguard oases across the world, hoping its experience with towns like Risani can provide vital lessons. Thuli Shabalala, CCTV.
Well, an example there of community-led initiatives taking place in Morocco, where, of course, this year's COP22 conference is underway in Marrakesh. Let's bring that into the discussion now, and starting with you, Dr. Beta Mariam. We know, of course, that often the major focus of the COP22 or the COP meetings is carbon emissions. Are we doing enough to make sure that Africa's issues are high enough on the agenda?
Well, I mean, it's always good to have these conventions, and it's good to see that this time is happening also in this continent, which is very nice. And then I read that, you know, the Morocco government is also would like to bring adaptation of African agriculture. They call it AAA to introduce that one to this one. So I think mentioning agriculture is very, very critical, and then which I'm very happy to read about, which is very timely, because for the whole land degradation and desertification also, you know, improper agricultural practices, and then agriculture is also one important sector to address. So having also a very good synergy with other COPs is also very, with other UNCCD, for instance, with other convention is also very useful. Like climate change is one, but I mean, to really achieve the climate change goal, I think land is a very critical thing. And then if you have very degraded lands, I think we may not be able to really achieve the goal in climate change at the same time. So the same thing with also biodiversity. So bringing these three conventions, like Convention on Desertification, Convention on Biodiversity, Convention on Climate Change, the three Rio Conventions, together as much as possible would also make us very strong. Creating synergy among them is very, very easily done. And then also it will not confuse even countries, so that it will be very integrated kind of approach to address, you know, multiple these international goals at a time. So I think African agriculture is really taken up there, but I think I would expect Africa to bring land degradation issues very strongly in this scope, because that is one of the pressing environmental problem, I would say, that we have been facing, and then our smallholders have been.
And let's bring in our guest just for a moment from Lagos, Mr. Oresanya. Of course, a lot of hope that that we will see land degradation feature strongly in this COP22 meeting in Marrakesh. Are you optimistic that Africa's voice will be heard?
Well, I believe Africa's voice should be right now, because of the various actions being taken by African cities, especially on the READ and the READ Plus action programs. And African cities, African nations right now are set to benefit on the READ Plus. And there's a regional action plan that is going to be discussed. And the regional action plan, it's all entrenched and various projects lined up by various nations for implementations. And there are also financing instruments that have been suggested. Even within the READ, the instrument, you also have the land degradation funding project that is already embedded also. The national funding deforestation neutralization fund that is already being proposed also within that same instrument for the African nation, so that the African cities can actually benefit immediately from the funding initiatives. And for example, in Nigeria, I know there's a local instrument also within the Ecological Fund, where a portion of the national budget is also being deployed to match the fund that will be given the support from the global negotiation. So one of the key negotiations Africa is looking at in this Marrakesh, COP22, is about the funding instrument and how most Africans can benefit immediately from this funding instrument. And I'm very optimistic this will go through.
And Dr. Shen, let's turn to you now in Beijing. On this issue of funding instruments, when you look at organizations such as yours, the Asia Development Bank and others like it, do you think Africa, or at least Africa's climate concerns and Africa's environmental challenges are a high enough priority for external funders?
Well, I think for Africa, climate change, environmental issues are all key issues. And through providing funds by international funding agencies like World Bank, Asian Development Bank, African Development Bank, I think those banks, they will need to work together to help. In addition, the local government, in different countries, they also need to provide the budget. So the money from the international organizations are very limited from my point of view. I think that every country needs to work together, or even the South-South cooperation need to be applied, like China, Africa, India, Africa. I think when people work together and improve the technology and also this enabling environment, so I think the agriculture issues caused by climate change and also the environmental issues can be all solved.
All right, let's bring you back in, Dr. Betamariam, on the issue of vulnerability. We know that adaptation, mitigation, these are the things that we're looking at going forward, but we are still talking about incredibly vulnerable communities. Do they have the resilience? Have we done enough to ensure that these communities are resilient enough to make it through what's to come as far as climate change is concerned?
Well, the resilience, it really depends where you are. And then, oftentimes, smallholder farmers are really being very much affected. If you consider, for instance, pastoralists who are doing, following their cattle, for instance. And then when it comes to, climate change and then also drought and then related kind of consequences, oftentimes they are the victims. They are the one who is living their livelihood. They are the one living their landscapes. So I think it is really the resilience of, especially smallholding farmers, African farmers are really at stake, that we need to really build their, when you think about mitigation and adaptation, I think they should go together to me, and then it's not separate as we speak about. Then I think it's really good to bring both adaptation and mitigation and then really help smallholder farmers to cope with any kind of shock when it comes to climate and land degradation, I think.
Well, let's certainly hope that we see adaptation, mitigation and collaboration indeed coming together at the COP22 summit. That is all we have time for this week on Talk Africa. But thank you very much to my guests for their insights. Once again, thank you to our guest in Lagos, Ola Oresanya, the CEO of Globetech Remedial. In Beijing, Dr. Shen Yiyang, the Senior Energy Consultant of Asia Development Bank. And with me in Nairobi from the World Agroforestry Center, Dr. Emrias Betamariam. Now remember, you can also join the conversation at home through our various platforms. Find us on Facebook, Twitter and YouTube. And do join us again next week for more Talk Africa. From me, Lindy Mtongana, it's goodbye.